Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining Coaching from the Soul, our talk show program. We're pleased to have you here today. I'm joined by a number of people, guests and other coaches, and as you can see, we're going well already. Joined by a number of other guests today who will join in our conversation. If you have any questions as you're watching, feel free to type them into the chat. And we'd welcome hearing from you. So if you're joining, feel free to pop into the chat and just let us know where you're joining us from. But in the meanwhile, I'm going to hand over to Edwin, who's going to introduce our topic for today, Thoughts Gone Wild. Over to you, Edwin.
Thank you, Graham. And it's great to see you all. I have been eagerly waiting for this opportunity. And so let me begin by inviting our audience to accompany us on a journey to truth and infinite possibility, to accompany us on a journey of profound exploration in the human experience. And yes, I am inviting you to embark on this voyage of unparalleled depth and significance. So this light-hearted conversation that promise to illuminate the mysteries of our existence and hopefully unlock the doors to the realm of infinite possibility. At the core of this exploration lies a new understanding that transcends the limitations of conventional wisdom and pierces through the veil of the illusion of our own perception of reality. My hope is that with each conversation into this understanding, we hope you're called to embrace a paradigm shift, hopefully of monumental proportions, shifting your gaze from the external world of form and circumstance to the boundless expanse of your own consciousness. I imagine this in my mind as a vast blank canvas, waiting to be adorned or decorated with colors of my own thoughts, emotions, and experiences. And as we navigate this infinite expanse, we come to understand that our perceptions of reality are shaped by the interplay of mind, consciousness, and thought. I personally have begun discovering how this infinite canvas of mind changed my own reality and influences the quality of my thoughts. I'm learning to recognize the boundless potential that resides within, empowering me to navigate life with much more clarity and purpose. Although I must admit that I still find myself bouncing back to my habitual thinking from time to time. But let's dive into this week's theme, thoughts going wild. And I can't help but to find myself with a lot of thinking right now. And as I begin to settle down, what comes up to me is something that I heard recently. Thought is a tool, nothing more, nothing less, only a tool. A wise person uses this tool to the best of his or her ability, which would suggest that we're not victims of this power. Thought is not reality, yet it's through thought that our realities are created. I love that quote. Because thought is the creative force that shapes our reality, yet often we are unaware of its profound influence on our lives. So we were to explore how our thoughts shape our perceptions, emotions, and behaviors, and how gaining insight into the nature of thought can liberate us from self-imposed limitations and probably even open the door to new possibilities. Thought is the foundation upon which our entire experience is built. Is the mechanism through which we interpret and we make sense of the world around us. Every perception, every emotion and action are a result of the thoughts that arise within our consciousness. Thoughts flow through our minds like a river, constantly shifting and evolving. But it's important to recognize that thoughts are neutral. They are not inherently true or real. They are simply mental constructs that we assign meaning to. And by understanding our thoughts, and we realize that they're not fixed or permanent. So we can begin to see the potential for change and beautiful transformation within us. Our thoughts have the power to shape our reality. They are the seeds from which our experience grow. Just as a painter uses a brush to create a masterpiece on canvas, we use our thoughts to create the masterpiece of our lives. The thoughts that we hold in our minds act as a blueprint for how we experience our external world. And when we harness that creative power of thought, we become conscious creators of our reality. We no longer feel like just bystanders or passive observers. We become active participants in the unfolding of our lives. And that's a beautiful thing. If thought is not a reality, but is that which makes up our reality, then it happens because it's something temporary that appears solid. It is pure, formless energy that can appear as form. That means that our personal realities are temporary. They are for grabs. They are not fixed. So when we talk about the power of thought, we're really not talking about better ways of how to think or thinking. We're not talking about the right way or the wrong way to think. Not even about what to do about thoughts we don't like. All of that stuff gets kind of sorted out by itself when we really get the feel for this understanding, for this field that we're playing with now. When we're given the gift of thought, if we didn't recognize it for what it was, we learn to use in certain ways. Some ways are really cool. We learn to use it to scare ourselves most of the time. And sometimes we even use it to amuse ourselves. But sometimes, most of the times, and it happens to me, I use it to scare myself shitless. Now, this gift is as good as new. And it's not too late for any of us to start using it in a way that will benefit us. We can start to learn to deliberately create realities that we want to live. And just by doing that, in our own inattention and lack of interest of other realities that are not serving us, they seem to dissipate through that lack of interest on them. If you could picture thought as a elixir coursing through the corridors of our consciousness, shaping out our perceptions, our emotions, actions with unparalleled precision, like a skilled sculptor molding clay into this form. Our thoughts mold that raw material of experience into the masterpiece of our lives. And now consider the ripple effect of these thoughts. How a single thought that is fueled with intention and belief can catalyze a chain reaction of events and outcomes, just as a pebble creates ripples upon the surface of any tranquil pond. So too our thoughts, they can reverberate throughout the vast expanse of our reality, shaping the trajectory of our lives in ways both seen and unseen. I wanted to leave you with this question for you who are happen to be listening. How are you using the gift of thought?
Thanks, Edwin. That was an interesting question, I think, to leave on. I did see one question come up in our chat, which I'll bring up on the screen, which was just, have you any tips on how to notice habitual thinking and step out of it? Like, what would your thoughts be on that one?
So we have this beautiful design inner system that warn us, right? There's certain emotions that are materialized after our thinking that is let us know what's happening up here. And when you find yourself in that habitual pattern of thinking that might not be serving you, you're able to recognize it and you get to question it. And the moment you question it, it takes a different form because a new reality begins to get constructed. Hopefully, one that you want to live into.
Thank you. And I'll bring John in for a second. Just interested, John, to hear your thoughts on what we've been discussing.
Yeah, I love how Edwin has put this whole aspect of thoughts, particularly the idea of the infinite possibilities. And for a while, it made me so excited that I felt, gosh, my life is going to be so much greater now that I've listened to Edwin and heard what he has to say. But I also understand that I have an understanding of what Edwin is talking about. And while I haven't yet fulfilled the infinite possibilities of my life, I still think that those promises are there. I still think that the way Edwin sold it was a wonderful way to look at it once we get this understanding of the nature of thought. But I want to put not necessarily a damper on it, but to let people know that we're still going to be human. We're still going to be influenced by thoughts. And as Michael asked there about habitual thoughts, I think the nature of being human is that thoughts that have been habitual or familiar or sticky can hang around for a long time, even when we don't want them to. And I do think that can be something that is an impediment to this infinite possibility, but only an impediment whenever we see that it is thought. And I was just wondering, Edwin, or anybody else who's with us, have you got experience in your own life about how this understanding and this seeing of the nature of thought has had some manifest situation changes in your own life?
I can answer that. Life just feels different just by recognizing that I'm not a victim of it, that it's just a tool that I can use in a way that will serve me. And you said something that it resonates. We're human beings, and we're going to go through those patterns, and just recognize them, that they're that thoughts, that the only way they're going to have any power over you is you decide to give a power to it. So that's changed for me. Even though I find myself from time to time going back to that habitual thinking, I'm more adept to recognizing it and a step from it, especially if it's not serving me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was looking earlier at a quote that might be helpful for this topic, and one of the ones that came up was one from Shakespeare and Hamlet, and there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking made it so. And I think that speaks very clearly to what you've been talking about, that we can use the power of thought to mean something. And sometimes I think I've always thought that kind of getting feedback is one of these. Like you can get feedback from someone and think, oh, I don't agree with that, and it's gone, and it means nothing. Or you can get feedback from someone and think, oh, I really, that kind of frustrates me, and suddenly that sticks and kind of stays around for a while. And the only difference is what meaning we've made of it, rather than just simply letting it go. I see Roisin bring you in here just to get your perspective, perhaps.
Yeah, I was just thinking what kind of about some of the cool things that I've seen around thought, and I think one of the biggest things for me was realizing, like, oh, I'm not my thoughts. Like having that separation between my thoughts aren't real, I don't have to believe them all, I can observe my thoughts and choose which ones I want to give energy to. And I was thinking about, I think it was Michael's question, and about what's helped me, because sometimes I definitely find it hard. And I know, Graham, you mentioned then about kind of thoughts sometimes sticking. And I think sometimes I feel like I still have really sticky thoughts that are hard to drop or let go of. But I think even just noticing them more, that awareness of, oh, like this is a thought that like isn't a thought I want to be having. It doesn't make me feel very nice. Doesn't, like, just that awareness of it, I think is such a huge shift and had such a huge impact for me that probably I don't give enough credit for. Even just that noticing is such a big difference from how I probably previously lived. And knowing that I don't need to focus on it all the time. One really thing, like a couple of practical things that sometimes I like to ask myself is like, oh, am I using like this thought as a weapon or a tool? Am I using my thinking as a weapon or a tool? And like fact checking my thoughts, because there's an awful lot of sneaky thoughts that feel super real and completely like reality. And actually, if I really dig into them and go, what assumptions am I making here though? There's often quite a lot. So it's definitely, I definitely find it tricky to drop all thoughts whenever I want to. But I think the more I notice, the quicker it becomes to drop, and the quicker like it just moves on, just floats away.
I like that. Like, am I using thinking as a weapon or a tool? That's such a great question. And I saw a comment from Sandy, who's watching this, to say, I love I'm starting to see how I've been using thought against myself, and how seeing it more and noticing changes everything. And like that, really, she went on to say, you know, I'm no longer a victim of my thinking. And that really does, I think, speak to what you've been saying. And I love the invitation for people listening, like, to just notice and think, like, how are they using their thoughts? Jen, I wonder if I could bring you in for a second and just get your perspective on our discussion so far.
Yeah, I was just thinking, bouncing off what was being said then, that for me, the feeling that goes with the thought can act as an indication and a reminder of seeing all this. So I have a cat who has trained me, apparently. So the other day, I woke up to being batted on the head by her because apparently she wanted a fuss and I was facing the wrong direction, and there was more space because she lies on the other side. So just that being patted on the head meant I turned over so she could settle down and start her morning with a fuss. And for me, that feeling sometimes of what we may view as the traditional bad feelings acts as that sort of pat on the head to go, oh, I can drop that thinking and recognize that's all that's going on. It may appear like it's a surround sound reality, but it's just my thinking that's looking really real at this moment in time. So yeah, thought acting as an alarm clock, if you like, to point me in the direction of, oh, you're winding yourself up. Because I had that the other day. I had a text that arrived that first thing in the morning that spun up my thinking until I recognized, hold on a second, bit suspicious of this here. I've just spun out this entire reality into the future and created that with this energy of thought. And it's not reality. And as soon as I saw that, I began to settle down again and let go of that thinking.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think for me, one of the things we haven't talked about particularly is this idea of noticing in thought, like when we're having a conversation with someone imaginary that's not actually here and someone that's actually in front of us, and just how often we can be distracted. And I think sometimes, again, just noticing that, like, can be really helpful. And I think just kind of thinking about quotes again, there was another one that I pulled out in relation to this topic, which was this idea, like, if you sit in a hot bath, you think the whole town is warm. And I think for me, that speaks a little bit to this idea that you can be sat in a room thinking something, you know, often it's about ourselves. I think everybody in this room is thinking about me, whereas actually what's happening is they're thinking about their own what's going on. And so I think, you know, it can be really, really useful just to notice. I think what's coming out in our conversation today is the power of noticing. John, I think you were going to pop something into this discussion again.
Yeah, I love what Jane talked about whenever she got a message or a text and she started to extrapolate into the future what was going to happen. To me, that's a perfect example of the title topic of our talk about thoughts gone wild. And it's something that I've caught myself doing a number of times. Particularly, it could actually be somebody's phone number coming up or name coming up on my phone can trigger such a story in my head, and all in a few seconds. But what I was also thinking as well then is anything real or is everything thought? I mean, is there anything that we can say is real in this world, or have we made it all up? I'd love to hear some of you guys say something about that, please.
I think it's a real thought. It's like what you have said, that you see the name or the phone number of somebody and the story already gets created. And what is the story created based on? and then we react based on. And we give it so much power to it, even when we know that it won't serve us. And it brings me back to what you said, John, and I think Roisin mentioned too. One of you call it sticky thoughts, and Roisin says sneaky thoughts, right? And we might wonder, well, how did they get there? Were they undercover stealth, right? And we failed to realize, or at least I used to fail to realize, that the thought itself was not sneaky or sticky until I started to have thinking around it. I kept it there. And because it was something that I've been doing consistently, my God, it felt so freaking familiar that even though I was suffering, but it felt good because it was so familiar. You know, and I gotta scare myself silly right now, because if I don't, then I won't be able to. Not recognizing that that was another thought. So I had multiple thoughts about that thought. And then I was wondering, why it's still there? Not recognizing that I was unintentionally, I think, keeping it there.
And I saw, well, I'll bring in Roisin, and then I think Noki too had something to say, and I'm just going to pop up while I bring you in. There's a couple of questions that have come up from our audience, and I'd be interested just whether we can weave those in. But yeah, there was a question about, can we talk about how sometimes our thinking appears real, even when we start to recognize the nature of it? And I think Sarah had come and said, I'd love to hear about this stubborn thinking and how to avoid it. So yeah, just as I'll bring you both in, I don't know if you could speak to either of those as well.
Yeah, and then I'll go back to speak to John's question. My initial response reading Sarah's question, how do I avoid it? Like, I don't. That's what came up for me, is that I don't avoid it, but I'm getting quicker at noticing it and quicker at avoiding it and quicker at moving on from it. And one thing I loved about John's question is because even this week, I think I'm seeing more and more, like, that's my thinking. And I think when I first started to get into this conversation, it was more easy to see maybe like the kind of limiting beliefs we have, or the stories we have that we tell ourselves that don't help and are definitely weapons. And some things are really obviously thought, and it makes them kind of easier to drop. And you're like, oh, cool, yeah, I'm feeling good. I've dropped those stories and those thoughts. And then it's like I'll be walking along and I hit something else. I'm like, oh gosh, there's another layer of thought that I didn't even see. And that's like those sneaky ninja thoughts. And I wrote a question, and it wasn't to do kind of with us doing this today, but early this week I wrote a question on my whiteboard. I just put like, what if it were all thought? Like, what if it really were just all thought? Because I think even more and more I'm seeing how, like, transient it is. And one of my favorite things to see is, because I find like I get really sticky thoughts sometimes, and the idea about it just being innate and how we're designed that we can drop thoughts can seem really far away from our reality sometimes, and that can seem a really difficult thing to do. And I love going back to noticing kind of babies or young children and how quick they can go from crying and screaming 1 minute to happy the next minute to crying again the next. And they're just dropping thought all the time and dropping into an emotion. And that's how we're designed. And then I see how possible it is and how we are designed in that nature. And I feel like that's really cool to see, even if it doesn't feel as easy to drop thought like that as sometimes. I think I've slightly gone off topic of the question, but yeah, I love just noticing that about young kids and how easy it is for them without all the kind of stories and preconceived ideas of what they should be thinking and how they should be behaving, because they've not quite formed yet, how easy it is for them to change their thoughts.
Yeah, I like that. I'm going to bring Noki in just to hear from Noki a second, and then I think we've probably got one more quote. Maybe hear from Edwin as a close, and then we'll move on for today. But yeah, Noki, what's been coming up for you today?
Hey everyone, great to see everyone here. So what comes at this moment? What if our thoughts are not our thoughts? If I were to kind of delve into that question, Roshan brought up the example of a young baby when they go from thought to thought. I mean, we assume we go from thought to thought. Is that what if all our thoughts are simply been accumulated over our lifetimes from other people, our institutions, our educational system, our religions, you name it, it's all there. So what are they then? Then they're mostly belief systems. And that also means that we can let go of them. Some thoughts, like for example, if you're a young kid, it's like daddy and mommy will help us cross the road. But as we get older, and I don't know what age it is for any kid or any person, is that we realize that we don't need mommy and daddy anymore to cross the road. So that thought no longer exists for us, more or less. But if these thoughts aren't ours, where do they come from? They just kind of exist. The way I kind of see it is that it's like a record. You have some of us oldies, used to have these records, and some of these new people, younger generation, discovering the records. We have a record, and it's got a groove of vibrations, and let's call it thoughts. Well, those engraved thoughts, do they exist until they get put on the record player? And the needle's put on it, and then the volume's turned up. So what are those sticky habitual thoughts? It's that record player. You put it on repeat. So what we can do is we can take a virgin record and just put a new record on, put a new thought in there. Rinse and repeat. But if we want to keep going on to that old record, we can certainly play that over and over again. Sometimes that's good. I kind of like heavy metal and I kind of like classical. But I tell you, heavy metal has a certain energy and classical has a different energy. So it's up to us to choose what record we want to play and which ones we want to record, more importantly. We can be our own baby again, thought-wise. That's what comes up for me.
I love that. I'm going to bring John in a second. I can see he had something to say, but I love the idea that I think I've talked in the past about sometimes we can get stuck with both tunes playing. Like, you can imagine in your example, like if you're playing two records at the same time, it can be really noisy, and sometimes thinking can be that way. And sometimes I think it's just as simple as tuning in to one or the other, not listening to both. And yeah, I love the idea of replacing it with a new record or choosing what we want the record to say. John, what came up for you in that?
Yeah, what I wanted to refer back to Sarah's question about the stubborn and persistent thoughts, but also about the frustration and the self-recrimination whenever you act on those thoughts again. It's easy to get into self-blame and frustration. How do you avoid it? I I was that soldier for a long time. And it's a bit like what Noki said there. They weren't even my thoughts. They were the thoughts and beliefs that had been, as I called them, embedded in me, deeply embedded in me by my religious institution in particular, by my education and my upbringing. And they became my familiar thoughts. And when I saw that they were just thoughts, that they were beliefs that had hung around for a long time, and they kept surfacing and resurfacing, and then I kept saying to myself, you're in this understanding. You need to stop doing this. You can't be continuing to drag up these things that don't serve you. And that didn't seem to get rid of them, even though I had the understanding that we're talking about and sharing here. And then what happened, somebody said to me one day, why don't you just notice them without judgment? And I thought, what? Yeah, just say, wow, there you go again, John. Isn't that interesting? There you go again, John. There's another one of those. Isn't that interesting? And every time it came up, I'd say, isn't that interesting? And I asked the person, I said, yeah, but when does it stop? When will it stop happening? And she answered that it will diminish the more that you don't judge yourself for bringing them up. But it'll never stop until you leave this form. So.
I love that. There's a power in, yeah, isn't that interesting, and just letting it go by. As we come towards the end of our episode today, Edwin, I'm interested to get a little summary from you as to where your mind is. And just as I picked up kind of quotes, I spotted this one, stung by the splendor of a sudden thought. And I found that quite interesting. I think, yeah, I wonder if there's anything comes to mind as you read that, and just as we close out our discussion today.
You know, it does, and actually, I'm gonna refer back to. I'm not sure the name of the book from Mavis. I think it might be called "The Secret," or that's something that Michael shared with us, and that's what's coming up for me. That when she says that the only thing that can keep us from enjoying all that we already are is a thought, one thought, not someone else's thought, but our own thoughts. And I love the part when she empowers us, when she questions who is in charge of our thinking, who gets to decide where our attention goes, who gets to write, produce, direct, and star in the moment that we happen to be in the middle of. Is us. Not our past, not our future, not our family, not our friends, not the situations, nor circumstances, or anything else, but just us. And I'm staying with that for today.
I love that. Thanks, Edwin. And I think, I mean, just looking at some of the questions that came up today, I saw this, you know, am I using thinking as a weapon or a tool?
Yeah.
Anything real, or is everything thought? What if our thoughts were not our thoughts? Like, that's a really interesting one, isn't it? Where do they come from, and whose thoughts are we listening to? And are they habitual thinking that we can choose not to have? And they're kind of, isn't it interesting? Like, just the power of noticing and seeing, oh, isn't that interesting? So thank you, everybody, for listening today, and for our panel for all contributing, and for our audience for adding some questions and helping make this interactive. We're here the same time next week, where we're going to be talking about connecting with your essence, and John is going to be leading that discussion. We're going to have a guest speaker joining us as well. But in the meanwhile, thanks very much, everybody, for joining us in our exploration today.